Hi, everyone. Um, Today I want to talk about the appropriate style for reports. I'm covering what you're going to read in the book. It's on pages 281 to 283, and it says choosing an appropriate style. Most of these have to do with the kinds of things that you responded to when I asked you to write a paragraph about style of your sources. So when you were looking at your 4 sources, you wrote about the ideas and content, you wrote about the organization, and then you wrote about the style. So you're probably familiar with some of these things already. I took the ones out of the book and I sort of moved them around so that they make more sense to me. One of the things that they talk about in the book is top-down paragraphs, which means you start with your most important information at the top and you move down to the less important information. Sometimes people call this an inverted or upside-down triangle because the big stuff is at the top and it narrows down to smaller information at the bottom. We talked about this in the 2 examples that we read, how they have a clear topic sentence and then the evidence slowly moves down from most important to least important. The purpose of this is that if readers skim, they can still get the main point. So your topic sentences need to be really, really clear. This was the only one in the book that I thought had more to do with organization than with style, because you're organizing within your paragraphs. The remaining 3 have to do with style. So one of the things they talk about is tone, and they said first person is totally fine, but generally you're writing in third person. You're writing about what your authors have said. First person would of course be I, me, my. Those words are certainly okay, and you'll read about it in the textbook, but typically we're staying with third person. Third person is going to be he, she, they. All right, passive voice. Passive voice is when the subject is not clear, and Dr. Andre Posani and I have conversations about this all the time, because typically you want the subject of the sentence to be very clear, but Posani says that in lab reports, a lot of times you don't include the subject or who did the research because it's supposed to be more about the research than about the person. But I think you can still write about the research and use active voice instead of passive voice. So if you're not familiar, passive voice is when the subject is not clear. So in this example, bombs were dropped. We don't know who the sentence is about. Right now, the subject of the sentence is bombs, but clearly there's an action here. Were dropped, and we don't know who's doing that action. So if you can, try to make sure that your subject is very clear. If at the end of the sentence you can add the word by, then you are in passive voice, you're not in active voice. So if you can add this word at the end and answer it, that's the person who's supposed to be the subject of your sentence. As far as the sentences go, this one is more important. I think the tone is something that kind of comes intuitively, but for the sentences, I would like you to actually really think about these last 2. The sentences should be breathing length. I always advise students to read their drafts out loud. Oops. Read. Because that's how I'm going to hear it in my head. I'm sort of reading this in my head as I'm grading you. Your reader will be reading it in their head. So if you say it out loud, you can see how it's going to sound to somebody else. In your own head, you're moving at your own pace, but if you actually have to say it out loud, you can make sure that it's going to be in chunks or sentences that are small enough for the reader to easily consume them. 2 things that you want to watch out for are too many prepositional phrases and dependent clauses that are not connected to a full sentence. So let's talk about prepositional phrases first. Prepositional phrases, as you can tell with the word position in the middle, have to do with position. And I just did a quick Google search for the most common prepositional phrases, and I came to this website, in front of, behind, between, among, amidst, across, from, next to, beside. You can see that those all have to do with location or position. But when you have too many of them in one sentence, that's when it becomes a problem. So if you said, I was looking at my friend across the cafeteria next to her boyfriend near the door. You can see that the sentence starts to get too long and cumbersome. So you would want to break those sentences up or remove any prepositional phrases that you could. In an essay, the prepositional phrases that you're most commonly going to use are going to be in, on, or with. If you have too many phrases that start with that in a single sentence, the sentence is going to be too long and you're no longer at regular breathing length. I've noticed as I've been reading your drafts too, watch out for dependent clauses. So I just found a list of dependent clauses that I could share with you. But as you can guess by the noun, or by the sound, they depend on something else. These are clauses or parts of a sentence that depend on the rest of the sentence. They need the rest of the sentence to make sense. So usually these kind of clauses or sentence chunks start with one of these. So if I said, after my shower this morning, and then stopped the sentence, you can tell that doesn't make sense. I have a subject, it was me, and I have an action, took a shower, but I don't know what happened after that. So these clauses make it depend on the rest of the sentence to make sense. Unless you do your homework tonight, I have a subject, it's you, I have an action, do your homework, but it's not a complete sentence because I put this word at the beginning of it. These ones need to be connected to another sentence. These clauses cannot just stand on their own. So I would look for these words and make sure that when you read the sentence out loud, it does totally make sense. Because I see some people using these and making the dependent clause a sentence all by itself. Okay. Last thing that the book talks about is word choice. So these are things that I have taught for a long time. You always want to try to use strong verbs. They brought up nominalizations in the textbook, but you want verbs that show an action if possible. A lot of times we tend to rely heavily on the verb to be. That's totally normal. The verb to be is words like is, am, are, was, if you're going into the past tense. We use those a lot. A lot of our sentences use is or was. So if there's a way to avoid it, try to avoid it. If you notice that you're using is or was in every single sentence, try to add some actions in there. Along with strong verbs, this is just something that I always focus on, is having concrete nouns. Stuff and things are not concrete nouns. If you like name the thing that you're talking about. So if I was talking about stuff and things that were in my backpack, I wouldn't say stuff and things, I would say notebooks and pens and pencils. It takes up the same amount of space, but now you have a picture and now you can understand clearly what I'm talking about. They brought up jargon, and I just wanted to be extra clear about this. I noticed that a lot of people are defining words that don't necessarily need to be defined. So if you are defining self-esteem or depression or electric vehicles or something like that, we all know what those words mean. So those are not jargon that need to be defined. But if it's a word that is specific to that field that the average person wouldn't know, either avoid using that language or make sure that you are very specific about what you're talking about. So you can read through pages 281 to 283 to review these things. I just thought it was a good little list of things to think about as you're writing, because if you keep active nouns and breathing length and passive voice in your mind as you're writing, then you're less likely to make those errors. I would not spend a ton of time stressing about this because most of you are good communicators already and you're avoiding these things or following the rules that would make it easy to understand. It's just a little something to remember as you're going forward. Okay, I'm going to post one more video about format, and then you should be ready to complete your draft and look at somebody else's. All right, see you guys in a minute.